Late February 2022, Russia's military launched what they promised would be a 72-hour conquest of Ukraine. 3 years later, just under 22% of territory captured. Cost, approaching 1 million Russian casualties. That's over 60 times the losses from their entire decade-long Afghanistan war, compressed into 3 years. Institute for the Study of War calls it the most catastrophic intelligence failure of the 21st century. But those numbers only scratch the surface of a strategic disaster that might collapse Russia itself. Here's the brutal truth they don't want you to see. Want to know how bad it really is? Forbes ran the numbers. At current territorial capture rates, Moscow needs 220 years to occupy all of Ukraine. 220 years. The ruble's hemorrhaging value. Defense spending devours 42% of government revenue. And Russia's bleeding an entire generation of working-age men it'll never get back. We're watching a superpower commit economic suicide in real time. This is Ocean Alert. Today we're tearing apart the myth that Russia holds any winning hand in this war. You'll see the territory delusion, the manpower catastrophe, the currency in freefall, the propaganda machine eating itself, and why analysts now whisper that the Russian Federation itself might fracture under the weight of Putin's gamble. If you still think Moscow's winning, you need every second of this breakdown. Let's go. Start with the land they've actually taken. ISW assessed Russian gains through early 2025. Total captured, roughly 4,200 square kilometers in Donetsk region over the previous year. That's barely larger than Rhode Island. As a percentage of Ukraine's total landmass, 0.6%. But here's where the math becomes absolutely impossible. Forbes analysts calculated that at current capture rates, Russia would need over 220 years to occupy all of Ukraine. That's not a strategy, that's a multi-generational suicide pact. Think about it. 220 years takes you from Napoleon's invasion of Russia to today. 11 generations of continuous warfare. Stay with that calculation. 220 years of continuous warfare to achieve total occupation. Forbes went further. Projected casualties to reach that objective? North of 100 million Russians. Current population? 144 million. To put that in human terms, that's wiping out every single person in California, Texas, and Florida combined. Then doing it again. You're looking at strategic insanity masquerading as military planning. This isn't slow progress. It's a mathematical guarantee of failure. Now the butcher's bill. Ukrainian Ministry of Defense figures put Russian casualties near 975,000 since February 2022. Western intelligence? More conservative, but still catastrophic. UK Ministry of Defense confirmed over 750,000 Russian losses by year-end 2024. Compare that to Moscow's Soviet-era Afghanistan campaign. 10 years of fighting. 15,000 dead. Ukraine? 3 years. Losses 60 times higher. Territory is just the visible wound. The hemorrhaging that's actually killing Russia is something far worse, and it started decades before Putin ever invaded. Russia's demographic crisis was already a slow-motion disaster before a single shot was fired. Fertility rates cratered after the Soviet collapse. By 2000, Russian women averaged just 1.2 births each, far below replacement level. The result? A massive shortage of men under 30. They were never born. And that's the exact demographic Moscow's now drafting into the meat grinder. Russia is burning through the one resource it can never replace. An entire generation of working-age men. Over 9,000 and 10,000 fled conscription. Nearly 1 million more are casualties. That's approaching 2 million men erased from an economy already in demographic collapse. You want to understand how spectacularly Russia miscalculated? Rewind to invasion preparations. February 2022. Russian commanders were so delusional about their 72-hour victory that they packed dress parade uniforms instead of ammunition reserves. That single detail tells you everything about why they failed. Picture the contrast. Crisp ceremonial tunics with gold braid hanging in transport trucks, while artillery batteries ran dry after the first 48 hours. Parade uniforms. Not extra fuel. Not medical supplies. Not encrypted communications gear. Uniforms for the victory march through Kiev. Combat orders distributed to troops explicitly mentioned light resistance, followed by occupation ceremony duties. Logistics planning assumed Ukraine would fold within 72 hours, 0547 hours. February 24th, columns rolled across the border expecting a parade route. They got the longest conventional European war since 1945 instead. Air superiority? Never achieved. Ukraine's air defenses held. Tank columns? Shredded by portable anti-tank weapons and $500 drones. Elite airborne units? Catastrophic losses in the opening days at Hostomel Airport. Moscow's Hail Mary to seize Kiev in one airborne assault failed within hours. 06:12 hours. First wave of Russian paratroopers touches down. 06:45 hours. Ukrainian counterattack begins. By 900 hours, the air corridor Russia needed to fly in reinforcements, still contested. The entire operation, designed to end the war in a single morning, collapsed before lunch. Russia then resorted to poorly trained conscripts, prison recruits, and foreign mercenaries. The Center for Strategic and International Studies published their assessment in September 2024, and they didn't mince words. This represents the most catastrophic intelligence failure since World War II. Not just bad planning, institutional delusion on a scale that destroyed empires. French Institute of International Relations backed that verdict. Their analysis concluded Russia abandoned its own proven logistics doctrine because commanders genuinely believed the war would end in weeks. Senior officers were kept in the dark about invasion specifics for operational security. Result? They couldn't stockpile supplies. First months of combat saw severe shortages exactly when Russia held the initiative. After Ukraine stopped the airborne assault, Russian forces couldn't adapt. Modern warfare demands flexible command. Russia's rigid Soviet-era structure collapsed under pressure. Ukraine recaptured most lost ground. The war devolved into attrition, and Moscow started losing to itself. Here's the paradox destroying Russia. They're not losing to Ukraine. They're losing to themselves. The war economy is consuming nearly 42% of government spending, while the ruble lost 23% of its value in 2024 alone. Russia is literally bankrupting itself to capture land the size of Vermont. On paper, Russia's still the 11th largest global economy. Strip away the facade, sanctions obliterated high-tech sectors, banking system crippled, global markets locked out, ruble to dollar exchange rate swings wildly day to day, creating total economic uncertainty. But the real killer is war spending. Medusa analysis shows 40% of the national budget now funds defense. Unsustainable for any modern economy. Worse, a third of that spending is classified under secret military-industrial projects, paranoia and propaganda baked into the budget itself. Then there's energy exports, Moscow's primary revenue source. The European Union slashed Russian gas dependence by over 30% since the invasion began. Oil sales to China and India get negotiated at steep discounts. Russia's shrinking workforce increasingly funnels into energy extraction while manufacturing relies on Chinese imports. The entire economy is cannibalizing itself. So where does this leave Putin? Russia has three options moving forward: nuclear escalation, humiliating withdrawal, or impossible peace terms. And here's the terrifying part. Every single one of these paths leads to regime collapse. Option 1. Nuclear weapons. Kremlin hardliners have floated tactical nuclear strikes. Putin himself has rattled the nuclear saber over 24 times. But deployment backfires instantly. Limited strikes on Kiev or Ukrainian military targets might create short-term tactical wins. But NATO responds. Escalation spirals. Russia launches on NATO territory. Radiation clouds drift over Eastern Europe. Crop failures across the northern hemisphere. Global temperatures drop 2 degrees Celsius within months. And even that doesn't solve Moscow's core problem. Russia needs Ukraine's land and people, the 40 million potential citizens, to offset demographic disaster. Nuking them into uninhabitable wasteland defeats the entire purpose. Option 2. Withdraw. Political suicide for Putin. His regime staked its entire legitimacy on this war. Pulling out without achieving objectives triggers elite fragmentation and potential regime collapse. Putin's government is a house of cards built on the perception he gets what he wants. Crimea annexation? Win. Sowing NATO division? Win. Losing Ukraine? That signals weakness. The power structure wouldn't survive it. That's why, despite catastrophic losses, resources keep pouring into the conflict. Admitting defeat is existential threat. Option 3. Negotiated peace. Both sides reject it. Ukraine has zero incentive to surrender territory after 3 years of successful defense. Zelensky demands full territorial restoration, possibly including Crimea, plus NATO security guarantees. Even if he cedes land, NATO membership is non-negotiable. Russia can't accept any deal that doesn't legitimize its conquests. International diplomacy isn't helping. Trump's February 2025 meeting with Zelensky proposed ceding Ukrainian territory to Russia, contradicting his own State Department. Relations collapsed. Ukraine requested mineral deal revisions. US backed out of peace talks entirely. Russia publicly claims it wants peace. They've accepted probationary ceasefires. None worked. The 30-hour Easter ceasefire? Ukraine documented nearly 3,000 Russian violations. This is what military strategists call a strategic death trap. Unable to win, unwilling to surrender, incapable of negotiating. Russia has locked itself in a burning room and thrown away the key. What happens next will reshape global power for the next 50 years. Pull back, look at what Putin actually accomplished. Before February 2022, NATO was searching for purpose. Post-Cold War identity crisis. Trump criticized members for failing to hit 2% GDP military spending requirements. Today, NATO is revitalized and expanded. Finland and Sweden joined. That 800-mile Finland-Russia border doubled NATO's boundary with Russia overnight. Moscow's defensive position just became exponentially worse against an alliance that's economically larger, demographically stronger, and technologically superior. But zoom out to the global chessboard and you'll see the most brutal irony of all. Putin didn't just fail to conquer Ukraine. He accidentally created the exact nightmare scenario he invaded to prevent. Germany, one of the world's largest economies, massively increased defense funding. Poland, former Warsaw Pact member, is building Europe's largest standing army. Sweden and Finland pushed their defense industries into overdrive, shipping prototype weapons to Ukraine and partnering with US and UK contractors for next-gen systems. Diplomatically, Russia went from difficult but respected global power to international pariah. Largest trading partner switched from EU to China, a nation even more resource-dependent that can undermine Russian policy to secure access. All of this stems from one catastrophic miscalculation: the gap between projected military strength and actual combat capability. Pre-invasion, Russia ranked as the world's second most powerful military. Analysts cited 1.32 million active personnel, 2 million reservists, 6,000 tanks, 4,000 aircraft. Global Firepower Index consistently placed Russia second only to the United States. Annual military parades displayed cutting-edge hardware: T-14 Armata tanks, Su-57 stealth fighters, hypersonic missiles. Western defense planning built entire strategies around countering this perceived juggernaut. Then the second strongest military invaded a smaller neighbor, and none of the stats mattered. What we actually saw: elite paratroopers dropped into Hostomel at 0612 hours without proper support. Complete failure to establish the air corridor needed for rapid victory. 40-mile armored columns running dry on fuel mere miles from their own borders. Tanks deployed without infantry screens, easy prey for man-portable anti-tank weapons. Human wave assaults, a World War I tactic used in 2022. Logistics trucks equipped with commercial tires that shredded off-road. Aircraft unable to suppress Ukrainian air defenses. Museum piece tanks, T-62s, T-55s, possibly even World War II-era T-34s, appearing on the front lines. But the most damning evidence of corruption wasn't discovered in Moscow. It was found on the battlefield when Ukrainian forces captured Russian tanks and opened the reactive armor blocks. Inside, where explosive plates should protect against missiles, they found sand and cement. Picture the moment. Ukrainian mechanics pry open the armor cassette on a captured T-90M, expecting to see the layered explosive tiles that detonate outward to deflect anti-tank rounds. Instead, construction sand, bags of cement mix. Russia's military had been selling its own armor and filling the blocks with concrete. The tanks looked lethal. Underneath, hollow props that offered zero protection. Sand and cement, not explosive reactive armor. Sand. Attack helicopters and fighter jets showed up with navigation systems so unreliable, pilots duct-taped commercial GPS units to their dashboards. Next-generation wonder weapons? T-14 Armata tanks made a brief 2023 appearance before vanishing. Either catastrophic failures or too expensive to risk against cheap drones. Su-57 stealth fighters conducted only limited long-range strikes from within Russian airspace. Lobbing glide bombs, the one semi-functional tactic that's actually a Cold War holdover. How did Russian command misjudge this badly? The answer reveals everything about Putin's system. Intelligence services convinced themselves Ukrainian forces would instantly collapse, that Ukrainians would welcome Russian troops as liberators. This wasn't military miscalculation. It was reality denial driven by the propaganda apparatus Putin built to maintain power. Brookings Institution identified the fatal flaw. Authoritarian regimes dependent entirely on the leader's image are only viable while that leader succeeds. Long-term stability? Impossible. Former Kremlin advisor Gleb Pavlovsky, now in exile, said it bluntly in April 2022. This is all Putin's own personal decision. Nobody, including myself, realized just how maniacally obsessed he must have been with Ukraine. We underestimated the extent of decay of the Russian government. Remember, that assessment came 6 weeks into the invasion. 3 years later, it's proven prophetic. The military became a victim of its own distorted reality. Corruption endemic but hidden from reports. Training exercises were theater, not preparation. Equipment maintenance records fabricated while actual hardware rotted in depots. Russia's military doctrine, inherited from Soviet times, assumed the primary threat was NATO invasion, defensive operations, concentrated command to shore up weak points. But that structure also enabled rampant corruption and power consolidation under Putin. Now, with momentum lost, there's real possibility Putin gets removed. He'd be scapegoated for the disaster. Power-hungry Kremlin politicians would need to save face. But Brookings' analysis found no viable successor. Russia's political structure might not survive leadership transition. The regime could collapse entirely. That collapse would unfold in stages, possibly overlapping. First, economic breakdown. War economy already showing severe strain. Defense spending crowds out essential services. Mounting casualties, deepening sanctions, unsustainable trajectory. Critical infrastructure failing from underinvestment. Second, political fragmentation. Regional governors, especially in resource-rich areas like the Far East, assert autonomy from Moscow. Economic necessity becomes political independence. Third, military disintegration. Professional army ground down in Ukraine. Reliance on poorly trained conscripts and ethnic minorities from periphery regions. Unit cohesion shatters. Desertion rates explode. Equipment fails without replacement parts. Finally, central authority collapses. Palace coup, popular uprising, or simple inability to project power across vast territory. Moscow loses control over significant portions of the Federation. Consequences would be global catastrophe. Federation fragments like Yugoslavia in the 1990s or the Soviet Union's original collapse. Moscow and St. Petersburg would attempt to secure nuclear arsenals and declare themselves the successor state, saber-rattling just like Putin. Millions of refugees flood into the EU, seeking the prosperity former Warsaw Pact nations achieved. China could occupy resource-rich Siberian territory to fuel its industrial machine. We're not talking about Russia losing a war. We're talking about the potential end of the Russian Federation as a unified state. 3 years after what was supposed to be a 72-hour operation, Russia controls 22% of Ukraine at the cost of nearly 1 million casualties. The economic devastation is undeniable. International standing destroyed. Adversaries reinvigorated. And there's no viable path to victory. Russia isn't winning. It's trapped in a strategic catastrophe of its own making, with no exit and no solutions. The longer this continues, the more likely Russia itself fractures. This is why every major military is rewriting doctrine right now. The Ukraine conflict proved that massive conventional forces mean nothing without logistics, adaptability, and realistic intelligence. The U.S. Army's 2024 Strategic Review cited Russia's failure as a case study in what happens when authoritarian systems prioritize perception over capability. NATO doctrine shifted entirely based on lessons from this war. Military academies worldwide are teaching Putin's invasion as the definitive example of catastrophic strategic failure. Here's my question for you. You're in the Kremlin Situation Room, March 2025. Intelligence reports confirm you need 220 more years to win. Casualties approaching 1 million. 3 options on the table. Nuclear escalation that irradiates the very territory you need to solve your demographic crisis. Withdrawal that triggers palace coup within weeks. Or peace terms that require admitting Ukraine joins NATO, the exact outcome you invaded to prevent. Which path do you take, and how do you survive the choice? Defend your strategic decision in the comments. And what other military myths need debunking? Tell me in the comments. If this breakdown revealed the mathematical reality behind the propaganda, hit that like button. It tells YouTube's algorithm to recommend this analysis to more viewers who appreciate evidence-based military breakdowns instead of surface-level coverage. And subscribe to Ocean Alert for weekly deep-dive investigations into the conflicts and strategic failures reshaping global power. Every week we analyze the wars, the weapons, and the decisions that don't make mainstream headlines but change everything. Over 500,000 subscribers rely on us to cut through the noise. Join them and hit that notification bell so you never miss an episode. 220 years to win, 3 years to collapse. The math was always impossible.